Well, it's Groundhog Day. Again. And that must mean that I am Professor Robert E.G. Black, and this is the Groundhog Day Project.
It's one of those infinite time loop situations you might have heard about.
It's a thing where the same day keeps happening.
Time.
I wake up every day right here, right in Punxsutawney, and it's always February 2nd.
The last revision is what counts, apparently.
Minute 3, Phil is sat at the desk in the newsroom next to Nan, and we get a bit more of his interaction with her, and then we get interaction between him and Larry. We see Kenny, but he doesn't really get to do anything till next minute. So let's start at the beginning. I'm not going to be here for the 10 o'clock. Tomorrow is Groundhog Day, and I'm going out to Punxsutawney for our country's oldest Groundhog Festival. As you know, according to the legend, tomorrow, February 2nd, if the groundhog wakes and sees his shadow, we've got 6 more weeks of winter to look forward to, so keep your fingers crossed. I won't get into the science of it here, but yes, there is some science to the fact that hibernating animals, specifically groundhogs, do wake up in the middle of winter and do come out. It has to do with their production of, among other things, melatonin and this way the cycles of hibernation works. Because hibernating, despite what we probably learned as children, hibernating does not mean an animal just sleeps through the entire winter. It just means they sleep more through the winter than they did through the fall or the summer or the spring. It doesn't mean they just stay asleep for months. Some animals might get closer to that than others, but not as much as it always, at least for me, it always felt like when they were talking about animals hibernating, they meant they were just sleeping from like November to March. They just take a big long nap. The cool thing in this scene, as Phil's talking before we get back to the dialogue, is that he is definitely personable. We saw last minute how he is professional. He knows what he's doing. He understands the weather. He does it in a fun way that is good for the audience, blowing on the stuff on the screen, pushing the front away off to Altoona. And now with Nan, you can see he keeps looking over at her as well as looking towards the camera. But also as we go on, you feel like he's also playing a part. He's reciting something. And Nan both knows it and also might be doing the same thing. These two people don't like each other. Just look at the body language in this minute. When she's like, sounds like a lot of fun, you must really enjoy it. She's prompting him for something. She knows the answer, the real answer is negative. But he can't give the real answer because they're on the air. This is your 3rd year in a row, isn't it, Phil? I wonder if she knows that it's 4. She's not only giving him a question he won't want to answer, she's giving the wrong answer so that he has to answer. He has to respond. 4, Nan. 4. And you see that tension between these two. They are often at this desk together. She is the regular, what are they called? The anchor. And he's the weatherman, but it looks like every weather report, or at least weather reports where he's going to be announcing something, he goes and sits down at the desk at the end of his report, and they have to interact. And given the stuff we know from earlier versions of the script, maybe there's some history here. There's a line, I think it's in the first version of the script, where Rita comments on how Phil she says some snarky comment about how he has, not that he's been with, but she says like, I'm not one of your interns or something else. I forget the line offhand. But the implication being that Phil flirts with or has had relations with a lot of the women that work in the office. And in one version of the script, because they had to write this scene with they had no intention of ever filming it, they invented a specific worker named Stephanie decastro, who she thinks that she and Phil are a serious item, and he's like, yeah, it was fun, but it was one time. And he kind of is trying to let her down easy, but she's not taking it easy. And she goes home, and she in that scene curses him and creates the time loop. They never intended to film it, so I don't really analyze it too much as far as what they would have intended or how it would have ended. But I think if you give a cause for a time loop, it is less of a philosophical movie, as this could be taken to be, and what both Rubin and Ramis and Murray wanted it to be, and more of like a science fiction movie. You get things like Even Palm Springs, while it's more of a fun comedy and there's a little bit of the philosophical element, ultimately it's a science fiction film about them trying to get out of the loop. And that happens in a lot of time loop things. It becomes a science fiction story or otherwise about getting out of the loop. Because of Groundhog Day, it also becomes often an effort to deliberately manipulate the loop and deliberately become a better person. I always argued in my blog that Phil doesn't necessarily become a better person on purpose. It's not a deliberate choice of his to become a better person. He just runs out of bad options. He has exhausted everything else. And eventually you have to be a good person or you have to be alone. And Phil doesn't want to, and also in Punxsutawney can't be alone. Except for those days that he goes out and kills himself. Nan says, thanks, Phil. Up next, entertainment editor Diane Kingman looks at sex and violence in the movies. Stay with us. And that is a great tagline for what's coming after the break, because it is so generic that it is the kind of thing that is always in the news. And I'm recording this on June 17th, so it's the same kind of repetitive thing like Iran is going to have a nuclear bomb soon that we've been talking about for decades. I'm not going to get into politics here, but inevitably that stuff will bleed through because these are the things on my mind. Sex and violence in the movies is a bullshit topic that almost never goes well in the news. One of my favorite things, I've watched it a few times, is Siskel and Ebert. This isn't the news, but Siskel and Ebert did a special episode of At the Movies where they just looked at basically sex and violence in slasher films. Overall, they kind of hated slasher films and spoke very poorly about them. I make my choice of words deliberately because I do mean they spoke poorly, as in they didn't speak very well. Not that they just spoke negatively. They did also speak negatively, but I also think they didn't make their arguments very well. They cherry-picked choices, talked about like misogyny in slasher films like Friday the 13th, for example. They both, I believe, liked the original Halloween. They both hated the original Friday the 13th and specifically commented on the killing of women in Friday the 13th. But if you actually go look at the movie, I believe this still holds true for the original, is the example I use in my blog. Pamela kills just as many men as she kills women in the original Friday the 13th. In fact, I think she killed more men because she also, does she kill the cop that gives the guy a ride? No, he's still there at the end because he's the one who's talking to Alice at the end. She's like, what about the boy? He's like, what boy? The boy, and all that. Not that this is a show about Friday the 13th, but Siskel and Ebert had this hatred of slashers. There's also slashers I don't like myself, and some I think are unnecessarily sadistic, unnecessarily misogynist. And there is an inherent thing in the slasher structure that does suggest misogyny. In my blog, I argued that slasher films partly arose as a response to the feminist movement and were inherently conservative. But also in their existence, they eventually become the opposite. They become sort of feminist because you have the final girl who stands up for herself. They become less conservative because they are about people joining together or having to join together to fight back, or perhaps dying because they failed to join together. That's why there are often conflicts like the blonde girl who doesn't like what is Lar Park Lincoln's character in Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. I'm forgetting character names offhand, but the blonde girl doesn't like her and is actively doesn't want her in the group for no reason other than she's a little jealous. And so that conflict sets them up so they can't work together. They're not going to be able to get things done. And that's one of the themes of slasher films, is if people don't work together, they're not going to succeed. They're not going to survive. And you can't depend on authority figures to do it for you. You can't depend on your parents. You can't depend on the adults around you. You can't depend on the cops. Sex and violence in the movies is a topic both worth talking about and that is mostly unnecessary to talk about. The way the news talks about it. Because they're just going to complain. There's too much sex and violence in the movies these days. There's always too much sex and violence in the movies, and there's always also not enough. Especially once we have the internet. And then we hear the voice from off screen, I think it's Harold Ramis saying, and we're clear, as whoever, I guess the director, maybe not the director, but someone in the studio is saying, we're clear. That means camera's not on, go into a commercial break, And Nan, very, I think, good sport of her, says, have fun in Punxsutawney, Phil. But she's being a good sport, but she's also still taunting him because she knows he's not going to have a good time. And so what does he do? He lashes out. For your information, hairdo, which is a fantastic nickname here, there is a major network interested in me, which is a lie. Although in one version of the script, he does claim that he's talking to, I think, CBS when he's talking on his his car phone, because he refuses to ride in the van. I believe that's in the third revision of the script where he's doing that. Maybe the second. I don't remember offhand, and I'm not going to look it up because that's what I said the speedrun was going to be. And then we get to the introduction of Kenny and Larry. Kenny, we only see this minute, but Larry says, yeah, that would be the Home Shopping Network. And you get the idea that Larry and Phil know each other, and they do this a lot. Phil probably insults Larry every chance he gets, and Larry insults Phil right back. Larry's not as good at it, although this is a good one. Generally speaking, I don't think he's as good at it. And then Phil, of course, dismisses him. Thanks, Larry. Go wait in the van. And then, we do hear Kenny. I was thinking we didn't hear from Kenny at the end until next minute. But he says, that was nice, Phil. Big trees. The amusing thing here is Kenny is Phil's personal assistant, apparently. And he doesn't know what the line was. He didn't say big trees. He said very tall trees. I should know this. Up in the Pacific Northwest, as you can see, they're going to have some very, very tall trees. Yeah, very, very. He didn't say big trees, but Kenny repeats it as big trees. It's the whole repetition of stuff that people weren't paying enough attention or too eager to say it, or the scene was filmed on a separate day and literally, oh my God, I'm forgetting the name of the actor who's playing Kenny, but he just remembered it wrong and no one else caught it. That's what I'm guessing is what happened. Although they would have filmed probably on the same day because they're filming in an actual news studio, I believe, not a set, somewhere in Pittsburgh, not in Pittsburgh, in Chicago. And Phil also dismisses him. Stop it, Kenny. Look, can you handle the 10 or not? So Kenny is not only his assistant, he's going to be his replacement for the day. And from the look of it, Kenny's a little young, naive, and new. He's maybe not the best at it. He's not a threat to Phil's job. But Phil has to make sure he still puts him in his place. And Kenny says, yeah, listen, if for any reason, and we cut him off mid-sentence. But Kenny's thoughtful. He's thinking this through. And Phil doesn't care for it. And that's a bit it. That's all of it for minute 3. So, until the next time, watch more movies.
You were gonna say that.
This has been a production of Lemming Drops Studio. You can find links to more at lemmingdrops.com or join the Facebook group Lemming Drops Studio Tour. Also, you can support all my shows at patreon.com/lemmingdrops.
What is wrong in the end which never comes? Or which comes again and again, lapping, like waves.
Since the Big Bang set everything in motion, everything that happens in this universe has to be the way it is. Particles unfolding the way they're destined to.
How do you sleep at night? You've never seen Groundhog Day?
Yeah, you know Groundhog Day is not a documentary.
Remember when Groundhog Day was just a movie?